Hi everyone, thanks for joining here with Martin. We're doing a pretty exciting Q&A video today. I want to, of course, thank everyone who did submit some questions. We got some exciting ones we'll be able to go over. For those that didn't get any questions in, we'll definitely do another one coming up soon. So feel free to drop your questions below. But first things first, Martin, how are you?
Fantastic. Good to see you.
Ooh, fantastic. Love it. Well, that's good. That's good to hear. Well, let's dive into it. No real order to these things. I've got some general ones first I'll throw at you, and then some
Okay.
people ask a little bit more direct, deeper questions, which we'll get to in the second half. But first thing first, just to start picking, someone asked, like, what are the size of markets for some of the drugs that Context is developing?
Yeah, it's a good and pertinent question. So to remind everyone, we're focused on women's oncology, which means breast, ovarian, endometrial cancer. These are all cancers of the female reproductive system. So as we think about the market size, these are incredibly large markets, which is an unfortunate thing. So the funnel starts, and I'll use the United States as the primary comparator here. About 250,000 women are diagnosed with breast cancer per year. The vast majority of those women will be diagnosed early in the disease. The tumor will be removed. The woman may or may not get radiation and chemotherapy. And for most, if not all of those patients, they will be functionally cured. The problem is 5% or so of those patients over the next 1 to 25 years will relapse. They'll have metastatic disease. At that point, there is no cure for breast cancer. And the same thing for metastatic ovarian and endometrial. So that's our real focus. So metastatic aggressive disease. The number of patients is quite large. So if you look at breast cancer alone, for hormone-driven breast cancer, easily over 100,000 women in the US at any given time with a metastatic disease. And if you combine endometrial and ovarian, it's about 100,000 as well. So you're talking about markets that are incredibly large. What that means from a dollar and cents standpoint, I'll use a therapeutic class called the CDK4/6 inhibitors. Eli Lilly, Novartis, and Pfizer all have drugs approved. They all have CDK4/6 inhibitors. That class got approved in 2015. That was the first approval of Pfizer. And collectively, I believe their current run rate is over $10 billion a year. So this is a large end-use market. There's a lot of need for new therapies to address resistance to the current therapies and or to make them better. And so we see this, not trying to be glib, as a $1 billion plus market opportunity for Onapriston extended release, Onexar lead drug.
So then here a question about competitors. Do you know of any other drugs that exist? What are those company sizes, if so, and anyone you would consider as a competitor?
Yeah, people have been trying to develop oral progesterone receptor blockers for decades. So progesterone receptor is part of a broader therapeutic class called nuclear receptors. And these are typically what hormones bind to. So in prostate cancer, you have the androgen receptor, which is what testosterone binds to. In breast, you have the estrogen receptor, which is what estrogen binds to, and in our case, progesterone receptor. There have been very good testosterone blockers and estrogen blockers. There's yet to be an approved progesterone blocker. So why is that? Why are we the only company or the most advanced company? What's special about us? The challenge is that all of these receptors look really similar. So to develop a drug that just binds to the receptor you want and modulates that receptor in the way you want, which is we want to inhibit it, not activate it, that's not trivial. It's very hard chemistry to do. And so our differentiation is chemistry. We have a unique compound called Onapriston that we formulate in an extended release formulation that selectively binds and inhibits, antagonizes progesterone receptor. There have been other attempts to modulate progesterone receptor. One is actually FDA approved, a drug called mifepristone. It was unsuccessful in development for cancer because it's not a pure progesterone receptor antagonist. And therefore, as you increase the dose, you have significant side effects. But at lower doses, it's a wonderful drug for a rare disease called Cushing's disease. And it's marketed by a company in the US called Corcept Therapeutics. So we have a derivative of mifepristone that is more selective and has a cleaner therapeutic profile, at least in our studies to date, than mifepristone. So to sum it up, it's a chemistry challenge. We think we have the best chemistry. We put it in a form factor, an extended release formulation that gives the ideal delivery profile to a patient in their blood system. And that we think will net a better therapeutic effect for patients.
So here there are currently no approved therapies that selectively target progesterone receptor positive cancers. Why is Context Therapeutics going to be one of the first to be approved? So you kind of tackled that a little bit. Anything you want to add on?
Yeah, so we tackled how we're differentiated from the therapeutic approach. The other relevant question is, well, so what? Does a progesterone receptor antagonist matter? And what we learned as part of our diligence process in developing this asset and speaking to really smart researchers across the world was that we have this therapeutic class called estrogen receptor antagonists. We have the CDK4/6 inhibitors. They're used extensively. What happens to patients who progress on those therapies? What resistance emerges? And what is new and was unexpected was that progesterone receptor, our target, seems to play a fundamental role in resistance. And even just this past week, so on June 6th, in the publication Nature, a wonderful researcher named Catherine Briskin wrote an extensive publication articulating a very clear rationale around why progesterone receptor antagonism is a very rational and potentially important therapeutic modality for women with breast cancer, particularly in those with resistance. So it took good chemistry, and then you have a need. So just because you develop a hammer, if you have that tool, you need something to bang and create. And so the observation that progesterone receptor is important for resistance was a critical step for us in moving forward in this area.
Loving the answers so far. So here, moving on. For those that have missed the ASCO presentation, what are some of the highlights of the company that was presented?
So as you're aware, ASCO is the largest oncology gathering of the year. It's an international conference held in Chicago the first week of June every year. At the conference, our collaborator, Dr. Rachel Grisham of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, who's the primary investigator for a study, presented the first phase of clinical data for our study in a rare form of ovarian cancer called granulosa cell tumors of the ovary. We view this very much, this is a stepping stone trial. So this trial was never intended to be a registrational trial that we're going to go to the FDA. It was the first time we treated these patients by designing and enrolled patients who had failed all prior therapies. They were essentially coming to the trial as a trial of last resort. So we first wanted to show our drug was safe in these patients. The drug had a very clean safety profile that Dr. Grisham reported. And the second part was that the drug would have a clinical effect on the tumor and for these patients. We enrolled 14 patients. 2 of the patients are still on our drug. They've been on drug for over 2 years. So certainly we saw a gradient. Some patients barely responded to drugs, some responded extraordinarily well. What this trial did is open the door for the second stage of the trial, which is to combine our drug with one of the commonly used therapies, an estrogen blocker called anastrozole. And by combining the two, instead of going into patients where we are the treatment of last resort, we're going into much earlier stage patients. The reason being, you have a higher probability of clinical success early on in treatment. They'll be on our treatment longer, which means a larger commercial opportunity. And then lastly, there's a higher probability of success because again, they're in earlier stage, so less treatment advanced. So we're really excited about that trial. That trial is enrolling really well and on track to have the first data from that trial disclosed by year end.
Awesome. Super exciting. Okay. Here going on, what are the next steps / timeline for the Umpristone trials?
Yep. So what we've publicly disclosed is that by the end of summer, we'll show some of the initial data from our endometrial cancer study, as well as clinical updates for all 4 of our ongoing trials by year end. And again, what we publicly disclosed is all trials are enrolling well. As one would expect, it's a bell curve. So one of our trials is knocking the doors off from an enrollment standpoint. 2 are going just as we hoped, and 1 is our problem child. But on all things being equal, we're actually enrolling on track, which is great in such a challenging time. So all 4 trials will have data updates by the end of the year. We do have a major breast cancer conference in early December called the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. And so it's very likely we'll either present data at that conference or potentially around that conference, which also coincides with the end of the year.
How commercially available will a drug or treatment be?
Yeah, so ultimately that comes down to approval by the regulatory agencies and coverage from the insurers, both of which depend on generating clinically meaningful data in a registrational trial. So beating whatever the standard of care or placebo is in a statistically significant fashion. So we strongly believe we have the potential to do that. Should we do that? We think that any patient who expresses our biomarker, progesterone receptor, should potentially be treatment eligible for our drug in the indications that we are developing it for.
And then, so lastly, any future presentations investors should be aware of?
So all future presentations are disclosed on our website. And I don't think we've disclosed any for July as of now, but certainly keep tabs on our investor relations website. That's the best place to keep tabs of where we'll be in the coming month or months to come.
Cool. Lastly, I want to give you the opportunity. Any questions that are getting emailed to you that you think maybe didn't come up as general as some of these questions that we wanted to dive into?
Sure. There's an immense amount of interest about our preclinical bispecific program that targets Claudin-6. And there's 2 reasons for that. The first is that our competitor BioNTech at a major conference in April presented really exciting data with their CAR T approach, so a cell therapy based approach to blocking Claudin-6. What was fascinating was CAR T has worked very well in liquid tumors, has not worked all that well in solid tumors. And BioNTech had a 43% response rate in the first 16 patients treated. So that's some of the best CAR T data in solid tumors, maybe the best anyone's ever seen. So that's gotten people really excited about Claudin-6. The other thing is that a sister protein, Claudin 18.2, which is only relevant for gastric cancers, whereas Claudin-6 is relevant for gastric, lung, testicular, and gynecologic cancers. Claudin 18.2 has had very significant business development activity over the last year. And just over the past month, AstraZeneca and BMS transacted on 2 different 18.2 assets that were early stage in development. One was preclinical, one was in early phase 1, for very significant deal amounts, both upfronts and downstream economics. And so that then creates a floor for Claudin-6 valuations. And so that combined dynamic where we have clinical proof of concept through a competitor and then very clear valuation comps driven by a similar asset, I think really helps the program and has stimulated the interest in it for us.
Incredible. Well, amazing. That's fantastic news. Of course, want to say, thanks so much for doing these, and, want to say thanks for those that asked some great questions. Definitely do some deeper dive stuff coming up. And, when we have some of that data come out, I'm sure we'll do another kind of Q&A style, video about that. Martin, anything else you wanted to get in the kind of Q&A video?
Yeah, I think it's always important to remind people, Context is in a very fortunate position that we raised about $65 million in 2021. We understand that there are challenged market dynamics for growth stocks in particular right now. Our mission has always been to develop drugs to advance medicines for female cancers If we develop good drugs for these women with devastating diseases, investors will benefit as well. And so we're very lucky. We ended Q1. So as of March 31st, we had $45.7 million of cash in our bank account. That gets us into 2024, hoping that the current challenging investor climate doesn't last forever. But assuming not, I think we're really well positioned to execute in a time when others are quite challenged in doing so.
Well, look, thanks so much for joining, and look forward to hopping on another video here soon.
Thanks so much, Jason.